I'm Ian from Wex,
I'm Tom, I'm a professional wildlife photographer.
and we're here in Norfolk to talk about telephoto lenses. What are you looking for in a telephoto lens?
Obviously, for shooting wildlife, the focal length is really important to get me close enough to the subject, depending on what sort of subject I'm working on. My next real big two that I'm thinking about is the image quality, like the actual quality of the glass, the sharpness, and then the aperture in terms of how much light it's going to let in, so I can work into those early mornings, late evening periods when, of course, wildlife's most active. And outside of that, of course, focus speed is another thing that's really kind of essential in a long telephoto lens. For me, I'm a bit of a prime man. I always have been. I think the image quality that I get out of them is better. The aperture and everything we just talked about is better. I also like the fact that I have to be more selective in the way I position myself. With a prime, because I can't zoom in, zoom out, I've got to look at an area, work out where my frame's going to be, position myself, and then wait it out. And I find for a lot of wildlife photography that works really nicely, because the less you move in an environment, the more likely the animals are going to come out and show themselves to you. A zoom, of course, is extremely useful when you've got more of a dynamic situation. For many people, a zoom is going to be a really functional product, but especially when you get started in kind of wildlife photography.
I'm wondering, how do you then select the right focal length if you are going to have one prime?
I think for a lot of photographers, what you want to do is shoot pictures with one of those zooms, try different lenses. You can borrow them off friends, is always a fantastic way to do it. Work out what you like, then go into your image catalog, like my Lightroom, etc.
See your
and
EXIF data.
yeah, look at the EXIF data.
Yeah.
Where am I shooting most? And not only where am I shooting most, working out what is the ones that you're like, oh, I love that. That's when you can start to look at scaling up to those investment lenses, those bigger purchases that you're going to take a long time over, so you want to get it right.
So here we have all of the lenses that we have for a shoot here in Norfolk. Now obviously I'm shooting on Canon and Tom has his Nikon selection here. So we're going to just run through kind of some of the lenses that we have here, kind of what they offer and why they're good for wildlife photography. Tom, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, cool. So in front of me, I've got a really good spread of Nikon range. I think it's probably good to talk about some of the key features of telephoto lenses, what differentiates stuff, especially when you're working for wildlife photography. There's a reason that price points change, and that certain lenses are obviously far more engineered and ideal for when I'm working out in the field. Like a 28-400 for many people might be a great place to start in wildlife photography, especially if you're already a landscape photographer, an outdoor photographer. You want a lot of range, a lot of scope to do multiple subjects. You're kind of testing the water of wildlife photography. The thing here is you're going to have that aperture going to like f8 at the long end, and that's going to limit the amount of light coming into the lens that might make it struggle a bit more in low light situations. So next up, I've got like the 180-600. Now this is a really popular lens. I think the range is extremely popular for wildlife photographers because it gives you a huge amount of scope to do everything from mammals through to birds. At the long end, 600mm is going to allow you to like really pull closer. You can even use teleconverters with this. You'll just find that the aperture range, with being like a 6.3 at the long end, is going to be a bit more limiting when you start adding teleconverters. Next here is the 400 4.5. It's letting so much more light in. That's going to drive autofocus quicker, all those sort of things. That's really nice. But also the depth of field effect you can get those lovely out of focus backgrounds, clean kind of rendering to out of focus areas that is really, really nice. But then when we come up to super premium stuff, like the 600, this just has all the bells and whistles. I mean, super lightweight for this lens. It might still look like a massive chunk, but it is really small compared to past 600 versions. You've got like a built-in teleconverter that's incredible. Such an upgrade for being able to quickly just change focal length on a prime, yet still have the prime optical quality. Incredible autofocus motors that are extremely fast. Build quality that means that I'm not worried if I'm in really harsh conditions. That's something that you really get with those like top-end lenses. And the image quality that just will blow you away. And that's why it does cost a significant amount more than somewhere like this. But when you use it every day and it's everything you do, it's definitely worth the money.
Beginning with mine, obviously I've got the variable aperture 100 to 400 Canon RF here. Now moving up, the hugely popular 100 to 500. Now whenever, I've gone out to do anything to do with wildlife, for example, or even sports photography, this is a lens that you see out a lot. It's a variable aperture, but obviously it is giving you a ton of range. A pretty obvious choice and an obvious upgrade going up from something like this. It's going to give you increased optical quality as well. So moving up the range yet again, here we have the Canon RF 100 to 300 f2.8. Now, as you can see, this one is quite a bit bigger than the 100 to 500. And the reason for that is this is f2.8 across the entire zoom range, which, funnily enough, brings me on to the most expensive lens in this setup we've got here. And this is the 400mm f2.8. Now, if you do have a long lens with a constant aperture, and this one has a constant aperture or f2.8, obviously the cost is going to go up as well as the weight. But as Tom was saying, if you do want ultimate image quality, as well as being able to let light in when it is at a premium, this is something that you really can't do without.
Right, so this morning we're here at RSPB Snettisham. Came early doors, ready for the high tide. It peaked about 8 o'clock and we had some fantastic views of the birds that still few are quite pushed out in front of us actually. That's really quite nice. And today's all been about the long lenses really. I've had the 600 on most of the time, but also with my 28 to 400 around my waist. Just because, when you're shooting a location like this where things are changing quite quickly, you want to have options. I know that a lot of viewers will be thinking to themselves, like, Tom, that's like a £13,500 lens. And yes, it is. But for the quality you get and the images that I'm trying to create, when I want that reach, but I also need the light in the early mornings, this is absolutely perfect. But of course, you can still make, and I know that today I made some really images that I'm happy with on the 28 to 400. There's a far more budget-friendly option for sure.
Which is really interesting for you to say, because obviously I'm taking your lead a lot kind of today, because you're the expert here. And it's weird for me because you think that you understand lenses really well, but when you start getting to really specialist kind of kit and really long lenses, especially when they're primes with such large apertures, you begin to kind of figure out, it's like, well, how do I apply this to the situation that I'm in? And I think I've been taking your lead a lot today, and I've actually learned a lot. My photographic knowledge is good, and then just applying your specific knowledge is making me form a picture as to kind of what my needs are.
Yeah.
So I've got the 100 to 500 today, which obviously is not as wide a range as you have on your lens. And obviously I've got the 400 to 8. And I did find that for the first parts of the day, on your advice, I actually really enjoyed using this for the reach, because obviously a lot of what's happening was out to a distance. Yeah. But then obviously going on to this in the hide, shooting at f2.8, you see how the isolating power of having length as well as large apertures with an incredibly sharp image can actually really help your images.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people forget that it's not only about the fast shutter speed for reducing camera shake and all that we often talk about. You've got to remember that it's, with wildlife photography specifically, it's the animal movement as well. Like, if I shoot 500 a second and I've got some knot flying past, to be fair, the movement of the wings, I'm not going to freeze. I need like maybe 1,000, 2,000 per second to freeze that. And that's where these really come into their own. Of course, when you're using something like a 28 to 400, you're looking at the more wider scope of a huge flock of birds in the sky. It doesn't matter as much, because a little bit of movement actually, I think, adds to the frame. It makes it a bit more interesting. And that's something that you don't have to then worry about with this. That's kind of good for people getting started with these kind of with wildlife photography as a general.
For every gain, there's also something that that it takes away. And I think that's also an important thing to mention. These things, even though they are quite light, are big.
I mean, yeah.
I mean,
this is my bag for the 600. So when I'm lugging a lot of kit, this isn't what everyone wants to do every single day.
Right.
And I think, that there's a commitment there to, also you want the tripod, you want everything like that to support it.
It's all the ancillaries, of course, yeah.
And then suddenly that builds up to a lot more stuff. Whereas, if you're thinking to yourself, like, I like photographing wildlife, I want to be out and about, I want to enjoy long walks and hikes, then you might go something a little bit more compact is quite good as well. So right now we're just going to get back to taking some pictures, because the birds are kicking off the wash again and we're getting some lovely murmuration. So we're going to focus on this, and we'll probably see you at a different location.
That is insane. So one of the things I've found is that the combination of the two things of using the length of, let's say, quite a long prime, 400mm plus, together with a very large aperture of f4 and larger, creates an incredible kind of separation between foreground, background, and your subject, obviously. So can you talk to me a little bit about how kind of you go about choosing kind of a maximum aperture for your lenses?
So I think maximum aperture, the wider is always better, because it gives you more flexibility to shoot, you know, in multiple conditions. But I do think that a lot of people forget that when you work at long telephoto lenses, the depth of field that you get when you're out to 400, 600mm, especially if you work closer with subjects, is so reduced that a lot of the time you are going to be stopping down. Like most of the time, even with a 600 4 or a 300 2.8 that I use, I'm going to be stopping down to 5, 6, sometimes f8, especially when smaller subjects, you know, when you're trying to focus on the eye, but get the whole head of a subject in focus, you know, if it's a small little bird, I need that depth of field to really get the lot in, especially if we're working kind of like 3, 4, 5 meters away. And the distance of having a 600mm or a 400mm gives you that lovely compression that renders out of focus areas really beautiful a lot of the time. I think that some of the kind of more budget lenses can still really do that. And of course, if you've got conditions where you've got some really nice light on a day, you're still going to be able to get really great images. The benefit of these lenses is, of course, it just widens my scope for when I can work to create pictures, lower light. But of course, you do get that added little bit of magic that comes from the 400, you know, the 300, those 2.8 f4 apertures, those smooth, clean backgrounds that really separate your subject is something that you really can't compete with.
And obviously it's important to mention as well that when you're actually shooting in conditions where light is at a premium, having an f2.8 aperture when you absolutely really need it means the difference between kind of not having to push your sensor beyond the capabilities of getting a clean image that you're comfortable with as well, right?
I think the rain's really nice that we've got right now to work with. I always love using the telephoto bit, dropping down to like a 50th or a 40th of a second and getting some like the movement of the rain is always fun. But even if you haven't got a subject in front of you, sometimes just photographing the landscape with the rain moving in front of it with a telephoto compression can be really great.
Yes.
It's like an interesting shot. Like the reeds we've got here, but compressing, you know, definitely at like 300, 400mm, but with that rain moving in front can be a really cool picture.
Interesting.
One that I might go for now, actually. I think one thing that's great about like having a smaller lens, it's very handy for birding flight image. Obviously, you think about the 600, and it's such a kind of big lens to constantly move. And it's, you know, even though it's a lightweight model, it still gets heavy after a time. A lens like this is a bit smaller, easier to track subject. And of course, the zoom makes it handy that you can actually, if you're not very experienced with it, pull out wider to pick up your subject. And as you're following it, move in with the zoom to kind of get closer to get that shot.
So weird that you just said that, because that's exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
I was actually using my zoom as a seagull cane, and I was almost, and obviously the autofocus is so good in terms of tracking anyway with modern cameras. It means that as you zoom, it actually maintains focus and it just tracks it all the way in. So it's, not only have you got the tracking, you've got the zoom, and it's able to just keep it all the way out. I was just so impressed by that. It's something that I just never get to do with cameras.
With something like a fixed 600, you don't have the benefit of being able to zoom, but you have that quality for that perfect range. So you're spending a lot of time finding locations where the range is right, and then waiting for the subject to be where you want them to be. That's really important. And of course, you can even improve that further with something like a focus limiter, where I'm trapping my focus in a certain region that's speeding it up, meaning that when I get that little window of a subject there, I'm going to make the most of it.
Yeah.
That is a feature that is obviously on quite a few lenses nowadays. We have focus limiters, that's brilliant. And even inbuilt into like the Z8 now, that's really, really cool. So I can actually perfect it even more. That's quite nice. But a big open area like this is always great fun for practicing your birds in flight, because especially with a big window like this, you can move a lot more. There's some nice avocets moving around here.
So after a couple of days of shooting, what have I learned from my experiences with telephoto lenses in a wildlife photography environment? Well, After everything we've talked about in terms of all the variables involved with choosing and using telephoto lenses, I actually feel like, even though I felt like I did have a pretty good knowledge of how lenses work, bringing those things together, especially in such a niche kind of area, which is the really long lenses like the 600s and all the zooms, I feel like I'm getting closer to understanding the variables involved to making a very good selection based on my needs within the constraints of what my finances will allow.
And I think for a lot of people, when they're actually selecting a telephoto lens for wildlife photography, I think some people can struggle where they really focus in on just one thing. They'll focus in on like, I just need the longest telephoto lens. And I think that's something that a lot of people get stuck into. They'll go, like, I definitely need 600, 800 mil, rather than thinking, well, a lot of the time in the UK, it's not as bright as we wish it were. I wish I rather had a bit wider aperture, maybe lose a bit of focal length, come down to like 400 mil, but get that kind of f4, f5.6 aperture. It's going to let that more light in, so you can work in a variety of different conditions and things like that. And I would just recommend to people that when you're selecting a lens, really think about the subjects that you're going after. Yes, if you want to photograph very small birds, a 600 is going to be great. But if you want to do more of a variety of subjects, be it mammals, birds, landscapes, pulling in subjects, something with more aperture is going to give you a bit more range to work in all sorts of conditions. Something like 300 f4, 400, 4.5 is a really great choice.
And also shooting side by side with you and you giving me advice, what I actually found really interesting is that for all the really expensive lenses that you were actually using, you were also very happy to use some of the lenses cheaper in the range because of their attributes such as portability and ease of use to get the shots. So yes, maybe the optical quality wouldn't have been as amazing as some of the lenses in the 5-figure ranges, but they had attributes that you needed at that time. And I love that, because you weren't afraid to pick one of those cheaper lenses up, because it gave you exactly what you needed based on the conditions. And I thought that was really refreshing as well.
And it makes sense. Like, if you're going to go on like a 5-10 mile hike, something smaller, lighter is very practical. If I'm going to sit in one position and I'm going to be there all day, then it doesn't matter what size lens I'm bringing, because I'm not going to be moving around too much. And that's a consideration that people need to make as well. And it tailors your enjoyment of a day. If you're someone who's really hard into doing wildlife photography, that's exactly what you do. You're going to be the sort of person who's sat for 8, 9 hours in one situation, not moving, waiting for the perfect subject. That's what I do a lot of the time. But I know for a lot of people, they want to enjoy a day out in wildlife, go to a beautiful nature reserve, walk around, enjoy a different thing. And that's where something lighter, more portable is going to give them far more enjoyment out of their photography, but also the practicality to actually take in an environment and shoot some different images that I think is great too.
Well, that's pretty much all we have for you. We just want to say thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.